Marvin Mims, who was a second-round pick a few years back, flashed as a rookie and then was sort of buried. Sean Payton didn't seem to like him. But then at the end of last season, Mims got his opportunity and was scoring like a madman.
I do love, though, that Marvin Mims is out of the doghouse. It seems like that route share, that target share did come up steadily the second half of the season into the playoffs.
But if there's some self-scouting in the building and they start to trust Marvin Mims a little bit more, I think Mims could be a year 3 breakout candidate. Nico Collins a few years back, last year Jamison Williams. Not saying that we're going to see Marvin Mims reach that level, but I do think he could be a flex-worthy player.
What?
Why are you shaking your head?
You're welcome.
Redraft ends, but Dynasty is life. I'm Theo Greminger, today joined by Brett Whitefield, repeat guest. You know him from Fantasy Points. Been on Dynasty Life several times now. Brett, we're going to talk about deep Dynasty sleepers. And the Fantasy Points audience, the Dynasty Life audience, these are not names that we're like teaching them. Everybody knows who these players are, but these are interesting players because none of them will be in our starting lineups week 1 for the fantasy football season. But in a game of attrition and in a game of guys simply being good at football and taking over, some of these players could be in our lineups later in the year and make a big impact for us winning on a weekly basis. Let's get it started right out the top. We're seeing a number of takes here on who the secondary pass catcher could be in Tennessee. Elic Ayomanor is a player that the two of us were very, very high on heading into the NFL draft. You certainly were even higher than I was on him. You had him wide receiver 2 heading in. I think I had him as wide receiver 5 heading into the NFL draft. He, of course, falls to day 3, but ends up on a team with sort of a wide open wide receiver 2 role. Our friend Easton Freeze, beat reporter for the Tennessee Titans, who we play in a Dynasty League with, is projecting him to be a week 1 starter. You're also seeing some enthusiasm for Chim DK, another 4th-round pick, who will end up playing the slot, also a rookie. Who would be the best bet to make of these two rookies if they're going to both be on the field on day 1?
Theo, if you ask that thinking there's a chance, I'm
smiling. For the podcast listeners, I'm smiling. This is like a trick question for Brett.
Yeah, for sure. There's no chance I'm undigging my heels on Elic Ayomanor. He's the guy for sure for me. So hopefully you guys have been following along, Theo and I, through the draft and stuff, because I think when we did our recap show, Theo, or one of the recap shows, I said it would not shock me if Elic ended up being a day 1 starter for the Tennessee Titans. With the way that depth chart looked, he's such a gifted player. He's only been playing football for just a few years. And he fell to the 4th round because of medicals. That was speculated going into the draft, and then it was confirmed after the draft that a lot of teams flagged him for medicals. So similar to kind of a Puka Nacua. Puka fell for the same exact reason. I really like Elic Ayomanor. He's a kind of a complete player. There isn't really anything he doesn't do. He can win on the outside. He can win as a power slot, but he's great at the catch point, good route runner, to the point where, like, I really do think, like, he could push for one of these rookie studs, Theo. It's not even just a deep sleeper for me. I do think by week 4, 5, or 6, he could be a starter in your fantasy lineup. So Chimere DK is fine as a deep threat. I think that's why they drafted him, because they needed a field stretcher in that offense. But I just don't think for fantasy relevance, he's the guy.
Yeah, DK for me also is an appealing special teams player. Gives him an explosive element there. Obviously, he can play the slot, a speed slot there. So he could have some big weeks. Absolutely, he's electric. But Ayomanor getting a expected target total on a weekly basis and being a guy that we're like, hey, this is the number 2 target on the team opposite Calvin Ridley. I think that's in the wheelhouse. If you're in the projecting targets business here, Brett, let's say that Calvin Ridley hits somewhere closer to his 2023 136 targets. Last year he had 120. We expect the offense to be a little bit more functional this year. Year 2 of the system, and also a huge upgrade at quarterback with Cam Ward behind center after sort of the train wreck they had last year. So let's say Calvin Ridley hits 135, even give him 140 targets this year. Let's take a bull case. What would be your target guess for Ayomanor? Because if we're talking about 90 targets, 85 targets even, for a guy that's this cheap, every single person should be adding him to their dynasty rosters.
I think that's more than reasonable, especially when you look at the depth chart, Theo. And we're going to talk Chig Okonkwo, right? But
Yeah.
you don't have pass catchers. They just don't, and they don't really have the personnel to be this power run offense either. We like Tony Pollard, I think, at ADP, and Tajay Spears has been a massive disappointment. So they're going to have to throw the ball if they want to make improvements of the offense. So I think that's more than reasonable.
Yeah, I'm with you. I think Ayomanor is one where if you're a best ball player right now and you're not necessarily doing dynasty startups or in the trading streets, Ayomanor is like one of the best round 18 picks you can make on Underdog for Best Ball Mania. He's there every single time. You can build a secondary stack with Cam Ward or do a 3-quarterback build and draft Cam Ward and then draft Ayomanor. You can also stack Cam Ward with Chig Okonkwo. And we talked a little bit about Chig Okonkwo in the pre-show. Chig is an interesting one because the amount of steam that Chig Okonkwo had after his rookie season was immense. He was being drafted in redraft as like a low-end tight end 1, high-end tight end 2. And it's because he ended the season on such a high note, had a number of really big-time games at the end of 2022. He's always been a very athletic tight end, like a 4.5 40 guy, a little bit shorter, but he's like 245, 243, 6'2", always been athletic. Year 2, he ended up having some production towards the end of it, but based on the ADP, he was a little bit disappointing. Ends the year with 54 catches, but he was being drafted like very enthusiastically. Then last year was another interesting one. Starts off the year extremely slowly, but then ends the year very, very well. In week 12, he had a 14-point game. In week 15, he had another 14 points, scored 13.9 PPR points. Week 16, a 19-pointer. So flashes again at the end of the season. And now again, we get a quarterback upgrade, an athletic tight end. Is Chig Okonkwo a little bit of a sleeper this year? We're always finding tight ends, Brett, that break out. And we're going to talk about a few more tight ends on this show. But Okonkwo as a year 3 sort of post-hype guy makes a little bit of sense. There was a time when the dynasty community was pushing him up like next to Trey McBride after that rookie season.
That's so crazy to think about, Theo.
Nuts.
Yeah, I mean, that's wild. Yeah, I'm a big Chig guy. I'm a sucker for athletic tight ends, right? And so when I see his skill set, I see a guy you can use similarly to Brock Bowers. Now, I'm not comparing the two. Bowers is light years ahead of where Chig is, skill wise. But as far as what he offers, what he brings to the table, you can use him as that elite run after catch. Go to the Fantasy Points data suite, guys, and look up Chig's run after catch stuff. It's some of the best at the tight end position in the league, has been for 3 years now. I think he had 13 forced missed tackles last year on relatively low volume, right? So he's elite after the catch. So you can scheme up touches for him. He's a great dump and run check down option. And he's a guy you can scheme up deep targets to. I know that breakout season you talked about, I think it was his rookie year or second year, he had a lot of deep receptions, actually. So he's a guy you can get loose deep down the field, and he's a elite dump and run guy. That's exactly how the Raiders used Bowers last year. He did this with complete instability on offense, right? And so now you bring in a quarterback, you have a solidified offensive line, which should lead to a more consistent run game, which leads to play action shots. Long story short, Theo, I think he's in a really good spot to have a career year there.
Yeah, and he's also, if you go to Fantasy Points data, Okonkwo also is a good separator. And to your point, the last 2 seasons, it's been sub 10 yards per reception, but his rookie year was 14.1 yards per reception. So we've seen that sort of in the wheelhouse. And again, this is a player that is pretty much free. It's a late round pick in best ball and sort of a guy that's been brushed to the side by dynasty managers. It goes very, very late, even in tight end premium dynasty startups. So that's an interesting one. Go ahead.
Listen, he's also only 25. He was a really young draft pick. So, and he played wide receiver mostly too in college.
Yeah.
So late transition to tight end. Still, it took him a while to get a hang of it, but yeah.
Yeah, he was this was a player at Maryland who had some juice as a prospect, and then I believe he fell because it was had like a heart thing. Was it? Am I remembering that correctly?
I think.
Yeah, I think it was a non like football related injury that scared a couple teams off. So Okonkwo is definitely an interesting sleeper. So basically, Ayomanor and Okonkwo are two players you can invest in. And if Cam Ward is way better than expectations, one of these two I think is going to pop this year and give you an opportunity to get usable weeks. Another player who we were into in the draft process, I remember we saw him down in Mobile and we talked about Woody Marks at the time. Woody Marks is in an interesting backfield because Joe Mixon has been sort of a little bit banged up this offseason. There's a little bit of apprehension with Mixon, especially when you add in the fact that they bring Nick Chubb in June. Under the radar is Woody Marks. So you got the two old guys, and then you've also got the old rookie. Woody Marks is 24 and a half years old, sort of a Tyrone Tracy age player. Tracy was an older rookie last year, but Woody Marks was by far and away the most productive collegiate running back as a receiver in this entire draft class. It wasn't even close. He had like north of 250 receptions as a collegiate, including 83 in that one season at Mississippi State several years back. This past year, Woody Marks goes over 1,000 rushing yards. So we finally see like significant rushing production for him that was not necessarily in the bag for him in his time in the SEC. Had 1,133 rushing yards this year for USC. Marks is fun. I've been drafting him, and I have a good amount of exposure to him. I love the situation where it's two older backs, and then you've got Marks, and then you add into it, it's a younger back who can really catch the ball. Do you think that he could have a weekly role in this offense as sort of a third down, passing down specialist?
Yes. The anecdote I'll use is Nick Caley. The bulk of Nick Caley's career was spent with Josh McDaniels in New England. Under Josh McDaniels, we saw, all the way back to Kevin Falk, James White, Dion Lewis, these real niche specific, I would say speed / receiving backs have a ton of success. James White was very fantasy viable for many years. Dion Lewis was a fantasy stud for a couple of years there in New England. So I think if there's any chance that Nick Caley replicates that Earhart Perkins matchup-based offense where they're going to look to expose other teams' linebackers and safeties with the running back position, if there's any chance, you got to go collect Woody Marks now while he's cheap, right? And I've got a ton of shares of him personally, just because I think there is a legitimate chance he turns into a James White type player this year. And I think that's incredibly valuable for what the cost of acquisition is right now.
Yeah, and the market's cool on him. It's funny, like Woody Marks doesn't go on day 2, but he's the 14th pick in the 4th round. So we're talking about a guy who's not that far off from like the Bashal Tutin, Cam Scattaboo picks, like pretty close in terms of draft capital, and lands on an offense that we like. And when we talk about Houston, could they utilize Marks as sort of Marks checkdowns in order to compensate from potential offensive line issues as well?
Great point. Yeah, great point. Exactly. I mean, that's why that role's so valuable in that offense too. Think about the way Tom Brady was always coached. Tom Brady knew at the point of the snap if he was checking the ball down or not. And I know CJ Stroud's not quite there, but they're going to try to get him there. He needs to learn to mitigate some of the issues up front. And when a play's dead, you just take what you can get. And I for sure think that's going to be the coaching direction, as opposed to this Matador style quarterback play that we've seen from CJ Stroud. So that's a great call.
Yeah, I'm looking forward to it. And I think Woody Marks is another one where at some point, I think in regular home leagues, redraft leagues, people are going to be adding Woody Marks off of the waiver wire. You can get him late in pretty much every single format, including Underdog right now. And if Brett's correct, this is exactly the kind of best ball pick you want to make because he's going to give you usable weeks just on 4 or 5 reception type games when the game flow is in his favor. Brett, it's been too long. Let everybody know what you have going on this time of year.
Yeah, first and foremost, the First Read podcast with Joe Marino and I, we are cranking up. We start our training camp preview next week. So we deep dive every single team, give you their season outlook, we kind of tie a bow on the whole offseason and kind of look ahead at what's coming for each team, make bold predictions. And then I have a series of I would say SEO friendly articles coming out. I'm going to do the FantasyPoints first ever top 100. So make sure you check that out.
Let me ask you this, Brett. You guys are doing every single team. You're going to get deep and dirty in like your previews. You could do both sides of the ball. You do all that good stuff. For the fantasy listeners out there, give us an offense that's being underrated right now. A lot of times in fantasy, if we can just we get so into finding this ranking like wide receiver 14 versus wide receiver 15 and having a big argument over which players should be drafted ahead of each other. But if we just take a big step back and we identify a mispriced offense, you'll find 4 or 5 guys who beat ADP expectations just from that particular team. We see it every single year. If you had to bet on an offense that's being underrated right now that could break out, like last year, the Washington Commanders, how many points per game they added on. It happens. Your Detroit Lions, when Ben Johnson came on year one, added like 7 points more per game than the previous season. Is there an offense or two that you're enthusiastic about having a big breakout year?
I don't have a great feel for ADP.
Well, how about just pure offense?
Just pure offense. Maybe the Atlanta Falcons.
Love that one.
If Michael Penix Jr. can just improve his ball location a little bit, his accuracy a little bit, I think that offense could take off and be super dynamic. Zach Robinson, I think, is a great play caller in the making. So, I would not be shocked if the Falcons tore it. I know their offense was pretty good last year, right? So it's not a huge thing. But Drake London, Darnell Mooney, these are guys I've been targeting in most formats. So
yeah, I mean, the thing about Atlanta is the guys are not cheap. Bijan's being drafted close to RB1 overall. Drake London, you have to use a second-round pick, but his overall ceiling is leading the NFL in targets. So I really like Zach Robinson was one. The first few games last year, I thought the guy was a fraud. I completely was wrong on that one. When the end of the season came, I mean, the guy looks locked in as a play caller. It's very like for like with a Sean McVay system. It's a McVay disciple, and it actually kind of looks like a Rams offense. So I'm really, really excited about that one. And I think that Penix is the interesting one because if you're looking to find a player who's being drafted very low, Michael Penix is sort of the forgotten year 2 quarterback. The sample size was really small last year, but it's been so much enthusiasm about Caleb Williams, Drake May. Certainly JJ McCarthy is steaming up. Bo Nix is like quarterback 7 in ADP. Michael Penix is sort of down there in the depths of wide receiver 2, quarterback 2 land. So if he ends up having a big season, he can end up defying ADP expectations. And Brett, it's interesting with Penix, all of the Washington wide receivers, except for Jalen McMillan, struggled last year. Rome Odunze, Jalen Polk is like a cut candidate right now in New England. And Michael Penix didn't get enough credit for sort of elevating the players around him at Washington. So that'd be an interesting one to look at. Let's talk about Dylan Sampson, though. We prefaced it heading into the break. Quinshon Judkins, there's plenty of content out there about Judkins. He's a player that's settled in around the 6th, 7th round in most formats, being drafted sort of as a low-end RB2 in redraft. Judkins was a huge star in college, but Dylan Sampson this past season was absolutely dynamic for Tennessee, led the SEC in rushing touchdowns, also was a productive player alongside Jalen Wright the year before. Jalen Wright obviously was a very enthusiastically drafted 4th-round pick last year, behind Devon Achane this year in Miami, but Wright was a big-time player in the SEC. Sampson also contributed in that offense. Dylan Sampson, it made really no sense at the time for them to double tap running backs. But when you hear a little bit of the coach speak, Deuce Staley has talked about how they're going to line Dylan Sampson up in the slot at times, which is completely contradictory to the way he was used at Tennessee. They're obviously going to give him carries. They like his home run hitting ability. Cleveland struggled last year. I believe they were either last or second to last in rushing touchdowns among all teams last year. So they draft Judkins, but Sampson is very much under the radar, I think, because of the presence of Quinshon Judkins. Could this be down the line, them chasing the Nick Chubb, Kareem Hunt combo type, where they had success with those kind of guys? Or do you sort of view Sampson as is he a thorn in the side of Judkins, or is he a real threat to Judkins?
That's a great question. So here's the thing with Judkins. This is a guy you and I really liked pre-draft, right? But there's a plenty of guys, especially the more data heavy analysts like Scott Barrett. He didn't like Judkins, and a lot of the really predictive metrics weren't in Judkins' profile. And I was of the opinion, I thought the production metrics in the film didn't match. I thought the film suggested that some of those efficiency metrics and force missed tackles, more of that stuff is to come based on what I saw in the film. But I'm not going to throw out the fact that Scott Barrett could very well be right on Judkins. And if he is right, Dylan Sampson's a great value. Deuce Staley obviously spent time in Detroit recently, Carolina after that. He's pretty used to trying to put together a complementary backfield. He doesn't necessarily lean into a bell cow role. So I do think it's fascinating that he likes Dylan Sampson as the explosive, receiving type back. That's definitely how he profiles to the NFL. We just didn't see a lot of pass down usage at college, right? So I think he could be a thorn in the side of Judkins. I personally really like Judkins, but given the cost of Sampson, Theo, I've been seeing him go round 4 of most dynasty drafts.
Yeah,
I think I just did a startup. He went in the 23rd round or something like that. So ridiculous. Like if you think there's any chance this guy gets on the field, he's super valuable at that price.
Yeah, and they only averaged 94.6 rushing yards per game last year. That's 29th in the league. And I think that they want to, and just from bird's eye view, the quarterback situation in Cleveland is not good. Anytime you have a 4-way competition for the starting quarterback, it's sort of like saying you have no starting quarterbacks. I think it's going to be Joe Flacco day one, which is probably the best fantasy outcome. Maybe we see a Shedeur Sanders, a Dylan Gabriel at times. I don't buy into the Kenny Pickett.
Really?
I don't know. He's just a dude.
The beats are saying it's Pickett's job to lose right now.
I sure hope the beats are wrong on that one. I think I hope I'm rooting for Joe Flacco there. But at the end of the day, I think Sampson, it's one of those players where people are treating this like it's a 90-10 outcome for him versus Quinshon Judkins.
True.
It could be closer to a 75-25. And I'm still drafting Judkins with enthusiasm. Judkins checks off a ton of boxes. He's very athletic. The combine was very good for him. Obviously, he was one of the best freshmen in SEC history, only trailing Herschel Walker. And Judkins also showed that he could thrive at Ohio State as well. So had unbelievable production in sort of the two of the biggest programs in college football over a 3-year period. So this is not an anti-Judkins case, but we do see players get injured. We do see opportunities present themselves. And when I look at Dylan Sampson, he's 20 years old, and they took him in the 4th round. They're talking about interesting ways to use him. This could be a player that turns into be sort of a dynamic weapon as a complementary back to Sampson, the sort of handcuff that we get super excited about. And if they become running back centric in their touches, he could end up being a handcuff plus in year 2. So the cost for Sampson is definitely not reflective of his 4th round draft capital. He's sort of being treated the same out there as guys like Ja'Cory Krosky-Merritt, Taj Brooks, who were like 6th and 7th round picks with sort of a more clear path to touches. So I'm into Dylan Sampson. I want to have exposure to him. Another 4th round pick that's sort of also being brushed to the side is Trevor Etienne. And we keep talking about these 4th round draft pick running backs because they're interesting. Last year, this is where we saw Bucky Irving hit. The 4th round has been it's sort of the new 3rd round in today's NFL where some running backs are pushed down in value. And when it comes to Etienne, it was a surprising pick because Carolina gave Chuba Hubbard this massive contract. They signed Rico Dowdle, who had 1,000 rushing yards last year in Dallas as a free agent. And Jonathan Brooks is not dead. Jonathan Brooks is simply going to miss the season. The franchise has given no indication that Jonathan Brooks' long-term outlook is something that they're moving on from. But they sort of showed us with their moves this year that maybe Etienne was a hedge for Jonathan Brooks as sort of their long-term answer at running back. Or is Trevor Etienne just good enough that if there was an injury to Chuba Hubbard, we could see Etienne and not Dowdle be the next man in?
Yeah, here's the thing. The Dave Canales offense, think about his last year in Tampa Bay. I mean, how many targets did Rachaad White get?
A million. Rashad White was like third in running back touches that season.
Yeah, exactly. And now you have a guy in Chuba Hubbard who's not really a pass down guy at all. He's more of an early down workhorse. Same could be said for Rico. I think Rico Dowdle is a really good backup balanced running back. He can do a little bit of everything and do it at a average or a slightly above average level. But he's not a guy you really want to put the ball in his hands if you don't have to. And enter Trevor Etienne, who profiles as a really good pass-catching guy. He's explosive. He's got excellent hands. We saw him at the Senior Bowl, Theo. He was tearing people up in the route running drills. He has the Georgia pedigree, too, which we know NFL teams love a lot. It's pretty rare to have a Georgia running back completely brick, especially when they get any type of draft capital. I think his play style resembles that of James Cook very favorably. So, yeah, I think this is a guy who definitely could have a role. I think the Jonathan Brooks hedge bit that you said is probably spot on there. It's possible we get a Etienne, Chuba Hubbard backfield, and Rico Donald's just the insurance policy for both guys.
Yeah, I just keep getting back to the fact that it was the fourth round. He was the 114th pick overall, and we're so over the top about, and obviously these two guys, it's not just a landing spot or potential opportunity. We were in on Bashal Tutin, Cam Scatterbu heading into the NFL draft, but Bashal Tutin goes 104, Cam Scatterbu goes 105, and then we see Trevor Etienne go 114. Bashal Tutin and Cam Scatterbu are being aggressively drafted in every single league, and in Dynasty rookie drafts, so those guys are locked into round 2. You talk about Woody Marks being free, like Trevor Etienne falls below Dylan Sampson in a bunch of these startups. So Etienne, with his receiving ability, the SEC pedigree, obviously his brother had success in the league, Travis Etienne. I think Etienne is a really, really fun dynasty stash. And then when we just talk about Rico Dowdle, like, I get it. Rico Dowdle's 27 years old. He just came off of his career year, but it took him so long to get going. He was a 25-year-old breakout where basically had 360 rushing yards in 2023. Before that, it was absolutely nothing. And I know that the 1 year, 2022, he only played 5 games, but he had 0 rush attempts. And in 2020, played 15 games, had 7 rush attempts. Like, he was a completely rushed aside player. It seems to me that Etienne, talent-wise, might be there ahead of Dowdle. Now, is Dowdle more capable of a heavy rushing workload right away? I think absolutely. But you talk about the Dave Canales offense being more diverse, using a lot of running back targets. I think Etienne's a really, really fun stash.
Totally agree. Also, worth pointing out with the running backs going in this 4th round range we're talking about, we kind of predicted that would happen, Theo. Like, this is a really good running back class at the top. We knew that teams would be willing to wait on the running back they wanted until day 3 because there was just so many good ones. So we kind of predicted that a lot of these guys would go round 4, and they did. And I don't know why we turned our nose up at it right away. I say we as a community, but
A lot of Christian McCaffrey talk every single day on X, right here on Fantasy Points. Graham Barfield and Scott Barrett are ready to say Christian McCaffrey's like the league winner this year. But let's talk about his brother, Luke McCaffrey. Luke McCaffrey was a converted quarterback, played quarterback at Nebraska, goes to Rice, has a really good final season at Rice, has a very strong Senior Bowl, gets drafted in the 3rd round, was like one of the last picks on day 2 in the 2024 draft class. Had some enthusiasm. There was, I forget which analyst, but there was an analyst who called him this year's Puka Nacua. People started drafting him, and then he did absolutely nothing. This offseason, and this is the Commanders would say nice things about him all the time, but again, did absolutely nothing. He had 18 total catches last year on 24 targets. This past offseason, Washington goes and acquires Deebo Samuel. They draft Jalen Lane this year on day 3. McCaffrey's sort of the man in the background. But again, you're starting to see a little bit of chatter from beat reporters that Washington likes Luke McCaffrey. Is this a player we should pay attention to, or is this never going to happen?
Absolutely pay attention to him. For one, the DNA, the genetics are there. Don't ever count out a McCaffrey.
Yeah, there you go.
I need to take my own advice on that, as I've been on the record saying I'm out on Christian this year. But anyways, Luke, let's talk about Luke for a sec. So last year was his 3rd year ever playing wide receiver. He was a quarterback in college for the first 3 years of his career, then moved to wide receiver, played his 4th and 5th year as a wide receiver, and then now a rookie as a wide receiver. Despite that fact, Theo, he was one of the league leaders in separation score last year as a rookie. And when you isolate for guys who run like 75% of their routes from the slot, he was like top 3 in separation score. Now, I know it's only like a 200 route sample, but the movement skills are there. The route running chops are there. There's just little details to the wide receiver position he's still picking up on. He's a fantastic athlete. I think he's getting even more athletic as he transitions from the QB body to the wide receiver body still. I'm a sucker for workout, off-season workout videos, hype videos. And
I love it. Yeah, I saw
just
he was with Bijan and his brother the other day.
And he's looking absolutely yoked. So I feel really good about that. And then in a ascending Commanders offense with an aging Terry McLaurin and Deebo Samuel, who Deebo hasn't been healthy or right. He still doesn't look like he's in shape to me. So I'm skeptical of that. And you have Noah Brown coming off of a catastrophic injury, right?
Yeah.
Am I wrong?
No, yeah, absolutely.
Yeah. So I think he gets on the field probably pretty quickly here. He can play outside and in. I think I really do think a breakout is coming, especially, as the Terry McLaurin contract talks are it doesn't seem like they're going great. So I don't know. I think there's an opportunity here for him with Noah Brown's injury, with the fact that Deebo always misses time, and he's so new to the position still. I think they're going to give him a lot of grace as they bring him along. And I do think he is a very good candidate to break out. Maybe if it's not like right away this year, I think it will be the second half of this season.
Yeah, McCaffrey, you make some great points about him. And it's an offense where Vegas is projecting Washington to win 9.5 or 10 games. And they're predicting them to be a top 5 scoring offense this year. McCaffrey sort of checks off a lot of boxes when we look for these sort of breakouts that come from nothing. The fact that he was a quarterback, the learning curve at wide receiver is still strong for him. And also didn't exactly come from Alabama. It came from Rice. So, the level of play was a huge leap for him. But when you start looking at the tape, I just remember how impressed I was when you started watching tape on McCaffrey. That last year at Rice, he just looked awesome. And then even some of the highlights for him as a quarterback, like explosive with the ball in his hands, as you'd expect somebody who's related to Christian and Ed McCaffrey to be. Yeah, and I got to say, in that picture, Christian McCaffrey, when we talk about yoked up, McCaffrey's always yoked up, not skipping trap day at all. Like,
no,
McCaffrey is way.
He looks 225 right now, doesn't he?
McCaffrey looks super ready for combat there. So, definitely, always been a weight room warrior, but McCaffrey looks extra like Derrick Henry-esque right now. Let's keep this going. It's funny to me. We get a 3rd round rookie wide receiver last year, and one that sort of fell because he had some injuries. We see this player have 22 points in week 14, 18.5 PPR points in week 15, 16.7 in week 16, 23 points in week 17, and then 19 points in week 18. And the Dynasty community is officially leaving Jalen McMillan for dead. I get the Emeka Egbuka. As prospects, I think I liked Egbuka more than you did. You weren't out on Egbuka. You sort of, I think it was an argument towards the pure upside. But anyway, you cut it. Egbuka gets 19th overall pick. Egbuka has steamed up in Dynasty. But when we look at Tampa Bay, Chris Godwin is still dealing with injuries. Mike Evans will be 32 years old this year. There's 2 old wide receivers there. Why can't Jalen McMillan have his opportunity again this year at some point in Tampa Bay? And Brett, just from a team perspective, how do you completely put away a player who had this sort of production down the stretch, played 91% of the snaps in Tampa's loss to Washington in the wild card round? Like, how do you put that away?
It's really hard, and it almost makes Tampa Bay's offseason moves kind of puzzling. Like, they've loaded up at wide receiver. I mean, think about re-signing Chris Godwin, and they're locked into that contract for at least 2 of those 3 seasons. Then they draft Egbuka in the 1st round, and McMillan, as you stated, had a great, first year as a 3rd round rookie. And then you still have the GOAT Mike Evans in the fold here. So I don't know, man. It's crazy, but when you look at the tape for McMillan last year, it's actually pretty astounding. I thought of the 3 Washington receivers to come out last year, he was probably the one that I thought had the lowest ceiling because you didn't see a lot of separation in his game. Well, guess what? He was separated at a pretty high level last year. He ranked he was top 25 in wide receiver win rate from the slot, top 40 overall from a separation standpoint, and then you combine that with the fact that he's amazing at the catch point, super physical at the catch point. You saw that with the 8 touchdowns. A lot of them are red zone scores, right? So, I mean, he was fantastic as a rookie. It's interesting because Evans is kind of aging. Chris Godwin coming off an injury. He should be completely fine for the season, but it feels like Egbuka was almost a hedge. I think going forward in this really explosive offense that you have, McMillan and Egbuka are probably the future of the offense. I just don't know what we get from him this year, Theo. It's a really hard puzzle to figure out.
It's one of those things where you want access to this player because he's so cheap right now. And it's not cheap because he was bad. It's cheap because of target competition. And we've seen it time and time again where things just happen in the NFL. You bring up Chris Godwin, and this is such an interesting one to unpack because Godwin could have had more money going to New England. So obviously, I think the two sides really love one another. Chris Godwin obviously values being a Tampa Bay Buck, and Tampa Bay wanted to reward Tampa Bay is a franchise I think that's very well run. They draft well. Obviously, the Baker Mayfield signing was very, very sharp on their part, and I think nobody really gave them credit at the time. Mayfield, going from Tom Brady to Baker Mayfield, looked like this massive downgrade, but they've made the playoffs back-to-back seasons with Baker. So Tampa Bay knows what they're doing there. And Godwin, it's almost like they didn't want Godwin to leave. It's sort of a nostalgia play there, where obviously Godwin was fantastic. Josh Grizzard thinks that he could score the same amount as he did last year. But now you're seeing Godwin sort of struggle to stay on the field. Mike Evans also missed time last year. And with Godwin and Evans, it's the oldest starting wide receivers in football. And Emeka Egbuka, there was a period of time where you had a discount on him, Brett, where it was the Egbuka versus Burden debate. Now the beat reporters in Tampa Bay have sort of ruined that, where they're like, Egbuka is awesome. Egbuka is going to be on the field. You hear Baker Mayfield referencing that Egbuka can play every position, said he's Chris Godwin, but he's built like a running back. Like, there's so much hype for Egbuka right now. But for me, it's McMillan is just the free square, where every time Egbuka steams up a little bit more, McMillan just becomes cheaper and cheaper. And then we saw Godwin miss time last year. Evans missed time last year. It's a pass-happy offense. Baker had north of 40 touchdown passes last year. And the contingent upside Jalen McMillan gives you as a dynasty manager, like if there is an injury to Chris Godwin or Mike Evans, McMillan can be in your flex. And if both of those old guys are somehow go down at the same time, McMillan is a top 24 play at the position, probably alongside Egbuka, based on how pass-happy that offense is. Right. So, like, I look at McMillan, 23 years old, and he's so cheap, and it's not reflective to the quality of play he had. It's just target competition. Give me that player all the time. I want access to him on my dynasty rosters. And Brett, he's done enough that he's going to get a second contract in the NFL. Like, even if it's a boxed out situation, let's say he goes into free agency after year 3, people are going to sign him and say, this guy can play, this guy can help us out. There's been players with far less production than McMillan who have been rewarded with another contract. So McMillan, both sort of long-term and short-term, is a guy that I want access to, especially with this very cheap window. There's two wide receivers. We talk about Evans and Godwin as the two of the oldest starting wide receivers in the NFL. But if we look at top 2 oldest receivers being drafted, Denver also checks this box, where Courtland Sutton turns 30 years old in October, obviously coming off of a career year for Sutton. Evan Engram comes over from Jacksonville. He turns 31 right before the season. So you have a 30-year-old and a 31-year-old. Denver returns their entire offensive line. I think every backup and every starter on the offensive line returns. Bo Nix obviously was fantastic as a rookie, and they've upgraded the running back position, going from sort of a very low-end Javonte Williams, Jaleel McLaughlin, Audric Estime trio into a RJ Harvey, J.K. Dobbins top two at the running back, which we would put in the top half of the NFL in terms of running back ones and a running back two combination. Then you have Pat Bryant and Marvin Mims. Pat Bryant, of course, was the third round pick out of Illinois, a player that Sean Payton has sort of been all over. And then Marvin Mims, who was a second round pick a few years back, back in 2023, flashed as a rookie and then was sort of buried. Sean Payton didn't seem to like him. But then at the end of last season, Mims got his opportunity and was scoring like a madman. The snaps for Mims were still low. Played 35% of the snaps in week 13, but had almost 20 PPR points. Then in week 17, there was that incredibly exciting game, that shootout between Cincinnati and Denver, where Mims had 30 points. He had 2 touchdown catches, caught all 8 of his targets, had 103 receiving yards, and of course had that like very long touchdown catch to force overtime. Then week 18 against Kansas City, scores another 22 points. And then in the playoffs, he had his highest snap share of the season against Buffalo, played nearly 70% of the snaps. So between Pat Bryant and Marvin Mims, is there a bet to make between these two players, both for the future and also, let's say that there's an injury to one of the top 2 targets in Denver? Could one of these two guys be in our lineup? But who's the better bet, Brett? They go very close to one another on Underdog. They go very close to one another in FFPC main events. And in Dynasty, both are sort of intriguing plays.
Oh, man, this Denver wide receiver situation is so tough to figure out. You didn't even mention Devon Vele, who, you look at our advanced metrics, he pretty much checks every box.
Because he's past the age apex.
What's that mean?
No, I'm just joking. Devon Vele is a very older. It's like, he's like, I get it. Devon Vele is sort of the forgotten guy. To me, he could be the wide receiver too.
Okay.
I'm less excited about him as I am for Mims and for Pat Bryant. Vele, just I guess, was an older prospect. Maybe I'm wrong on that one. So go ahead, talk to Devon Vele as well.
Yeah, I'll just throw him in there too. So Vele, I was out on him too, not really having paid a ton of attention to what he was doing last year. And then when I was doing my pass catcher series on my show, I went to the tape and watched it and was kind of blown away. And we spent a lot of time this offseason talking about Sean Payton and that joker role in the offense and the Michael Thomas usage in New Orleans. Well, Devon Vele was that guy last year in Denver. He was the big physical slot receiver, power slot in the Sean Payton offense. And as a late round draft pick, he played admirably. And it seems like when Sean Payton has a guy, when he likes a guy, he sticks with him. And I think Vele is probably due for a big year 2 bump in that Marquise Colston, Michael Thomas role. So I wouldn't, that's the guy I'm buying, to be honest with you. But to answer your original question, Mims or Bryant, I think Pat Bryant is the long-term solution for Cortland Sutton departure eventually. Sutton being a little older, Bryant's got the length and the contested catch prowess, the downfield stuff. Marvin Mims is more of like, if we're just going back to old school Sean Payton offenses, he's more of like the Devery Henderson type, where very explosive player. He's going to get you a ton of deep balls. And we saw that in the playoffs against Buffalo, right? I think he had a couple deep balls in that game. So I do love, though, that Marvin Mims is out of the doghouse. It seems like that route share, that target share did come up steadily the second half of the season into the playoffs. So I would say Mims, and just betting on the talent there. Like, I really liked Mims as a prospect. I didn't love Pat Bryant as a prospect. He was early day 3 guy for me. So I'll go Marvin Mims to answer that original question.
Yeah, and I'm going to go Mims as well. And I think Mims, like, it's interesting because Mims also had 9 rush attempts last year, and he had 52 targets. I just look at Mims and I say, this is a player that the Denver Broncos might be doing some self-scouting on, where you talk about him as a deep threat, but it's also the manufactured touches. The problem with Mims is the snap share. Like, you're never going to be fantasy relevant. Obviously, in best ball is a different situation where the you don't have to worry about which weeks to start him. But any player who's sub 50% snaps is a very difficult bet to make. But if there's some self-scouting in the building and they start to trust Marvin Mims a little bit more, Mims just turned 23. He was an early declare. He has day 2 draft capital, 6 touchdowns last year, and this is an offense we think could take a step forward. So it's a little bit of a leap of faith on Denver sort of changing the way that they use him. But Mims was a player like, and when we talk about Scott Barrett, we talked about Scott not liking Quinshon Judkins. Go back and roll the tape on Scott with Marvin Mims. He was all over Marvin Mims. This was a player that Scott was incredibly enthusiastic about as a prospect. And there were some other fantasy people very high on Mims as well. So I think Mims could be a year 3 breakout candidate. We've seen it time and time again. Year 3 is sometimes the year that it clicks. This used to be a thing that fantasy managers would look for, 5-10 years ago. It was, who is this year's year 3 breakout at wide receiver? And then it was a long period of time where it just didn't happen. Nico Collins a few years back, last year Jamison Williams. Not saying that we're going to see Marvin Mims reach that level, but I do think he could be a flex-worthy player. And when we talk about Evan Engram and Cortland Sutton, one of those two guys goes down, that opens up a lot of targets for what could be a very, very good offense. So I agree with you. I'm in on Marvin Mims as well. All right, let's talk about some of these tight ends. We talked about Chig Okonkwo earlier. There's a few tight ends sort of under the radar right now, and all of them have had positive beat reporter speak or coach speak. All of these players go relatively close to one another in dynasty startups. Oronde Gadsden, who was a really productive player at Syracuse, obviously very, very athletic. We've seen some incredibly strong statements from multiple coaches in LA talking about just how good Gadsden could be. The takeover could be there at some point. He might be a guy that we have to wait to really fully unleash until year 2. But I think once he's there, he has the profile to be a really strong player for fantasy. Obviously, guys like Tyler Conklin, guys like Will Disley are somewhat boxing him out from a full takeover this year, or are they? Then I'll also throw out Jatavian Sanders, who lost weight this offseason. Sanders was the first pick in the 4th round in the 2024 NFL draft. Played alongside guys like Xavier Worthy and Adonai Mitchell and Jonathan Brooks, and was still an incredibly productive player at Texas at the tight end position. And then Theo Johnson, who not only has the best first name in the entire NFL, but also flashed at times last year. Unbelievably athletic player, had like the 2nd highest RAS score of all time. And the beat reporters have said that Theo Johnson looks even bigger this offseason, but is just as fast and explosive. There's been a few beat reporters speculating he could be one of the top targets in New York. Obviously, it's going to be Malik Neighbors with 180, maybe 200 targets this year. Wan'Dale Robinson, Darius Slayton, those guys are back. But Theo Johnson could potentially take a big step forward. So I'll give you all 3 in a basket. Theo Johnson, JT Sanders, Oronde Gadsden. Is there a player of these 3 that you're putting a chip on if you could have access for all of your dynasty rosters?
Yeah, let me talk through all of them really quick here.
Yeah, take your time.
Theo Johnson, I did a on the first read show, we did a breakout player for every NFL team. Now, we didn't do only fantasy stuff, so there are linebackers and corner. Well, anyways, we did the Giants, and we both said Theo Johnson there, Joe and I. So we think he's due for a big-time breakout. This is a big-time athlete. He's got excellent movement skills. What really surprised me when I went back and watched his rookie tape is the short area quickness for his size is kind of nuts. This is not like a Kyle Pitts thing where Kyle Pitts is so long and big. It's like he's only explosive on that vertical plane, right? But that's not true for Theo Johnson. He has a lot of really good movement skills in the short part of the field. I think he's due for a big breakout. The blocking kind of impressed me too. I did not expect him to be as good of a blocker as a rookie as he was. So yeah, I think he turns into an every down tight end. I know they have Daniel Bellinger, who's kind of been in the mix for the last 3 years, but he's just a guy, right? He's a good number 2 tight end. I think Theo is going to be an every down player pretty quickly here, and probably a target guy. They don't have great wide receivers, so I like a bet on him, and I've collected. Dynasty managers are inherently impatient when it comes to tight ends for whatever reason, and so I've collected a lot of shares from disappointed Theo Johnson guys. So I definitely endorse that. Jatavian Sanders was a guy I thought his Texas tape was fantastic, like really, really good stuff. he would have been, if it wasn't for his horrendous combine, I'm pretty convinced he would have been a second round pick, Theo. Really, really poor combine, kind of dropped him out of that, high ceiling range for a tight end. But he lost a lot of weight. You said, I think he's working on that explosiveness. And so if he gets a little bit of that back, you saw good, impressive things from him in Carolina. The only thing with Carolina is they now have kind of a logjam of pass catchers with Tet McMillan, kind of the de facto one now. Leggett, I think, is a explosive playmaker after the catch. And then Jalen Coker came on as an undrafted rookie, and they still have Adam Thielen in the fold. They drafted a pass catching running back. So I'm not sure what his fantasy upside is as a relatively unathletic tight end in an offense that could be relatively bogged down. And then lastly, Oronde Gadsden. So my working comp for him pre-draft was Mark Andrews, actually. He lands in Greg Roman offense that obviously made Mark Andrews who he is today. So like I really do think there's a chance here that he could turn into something. The problem is he's got two, I guess, more accomplished tight ends ahead of him. Will Dissly is a great blocking tight end. And then Tyler Conklin is just a really solid all-around player who's produced in really bad situations. And so I think people are probably sleeping on Conklin to a certain extent in LA. I think he's a very good player. So I wouldn't say for this year for Gadsden, but I think maybe in years to come as a guy, he's primarily a slot, right? He's a big slot kind of move piece tight end.
There was some speculation. Would he be a wide receiver in the NFL? Like he's a true hybrid tight end wide receiver type. And we're lucky that he has tight end distinction and landed on a team who really views him as that.
Which reminds you of Mark Andrews. That's how he was used at Oklahoma. He played out wide a ton. He played in the slot. And then in Baltimore, Andrews, I think he plays the least amount of snaps in line of any starting tight end in the NFL. It's like 13% of his snaps come from the inline position. So very much a similar player there. And Gadsden might even be a better athlete, so there's definitely some ceiling there if he does get on the field.
Yeah, Oronde Gadsden is probably the best the fastest player here. Certainly best athlete would be Theo when you put the weight and some of the agility that he brings to the table. You talk about his blocking, that matters at the tight end position. Like Theo Johnson will be an every down player because he can be he's such just a unit of a human that even if he's not a great blocker, he's going to be an okay blocker. Just can manhandle people out there. And when you look at Theo Johnson versus Tyler Warren in 2023, Tyler Warren, if you take away the bowl game where I'm not sure, I think Theo Johnson might have sat that one out, obviously heading to the NFL draft. Tyler Warren completely tore it up, had like 120, 130 yards against Ole Miss. But Tyler Warren had very similar production to Theo Johnson. They both had 7 touchdown catches. They both had sort of middling receiving outputs. But we talk about like Tyler Warren had this big junior to senior year bump. It's because of Theo Johnson's presence. So he was a good enough player to sort of limit the usage for Tyler Warren. That says a lot right there. So I'm in on Theo Johnson sort of as the best balance here. Gadsden, I think it's a wait till 2026 bet. Theo Johnson, I think, could be a top 15 tight end this year and really an underrated player in Dynasty. Let's do the same thing at the running back position here. Talk about Will Shipley and Marshawn Lloyd. A third-round pick last year, Marshawn Lloyd injured the entire year. A player that I really liked coming out, obviously a big standout at the Senior Bowl. And then Will Shipley, who was a very productive player at Clemson, caught a ton of passes, was a very enthusiastically drafted day 3 pick, obviously had some issues getting on the field. Saquon completely dominated the running back touches, and Kenneth Gainwell's presence sort of precluded Shipley from seeing really any kind of usage. Now people are back to enthusiastically drafting Will Shipley. A.J. Dillon's in Philly. But I think that the bet is that it's going to be Will Shipley as the handcuff running back there. Dillon obviously will compete with him, but Shipley I think is the better bet. And then Marshawn Lloyd looks to be fully back. There's still some players like Emmanuel Wilson in Green Bay, but Lloyd, they didn't draft him to be a number 3 back. They drafted him to really to get touches last year alongside Josh Jacobs. So both of these guys are sort of post type. They both are relatively cheap, and they both could be potential high-end handcuffs to high-volume running backs in Saquon Barkley and Josh Jacobs. These sort of backups are exactly the kind of players that redraft managers look for on the waiver wire when the situation presents itself. But from a dynasty perspective, who would be the better bet for you between Lloyd and Shipley?
Yeah, like full disclosure, I really liked both these guys coming out, and that was a weaker running back class. I think Lloyd was my RB2, Shipley was like either 3 or 4 for me. So like I was all in on both these guys. That. Marshawn Lloyd, I gotta probably endorse this. You know, he has the makings of a bell cow type running back. He has the size, the pass catching ability, the explosiveness, the tackle breaking potential, the physicality after contact. So he's fantastic in zone concepts as well. That's kind of what he did at USC. I do think Marshawn Lloyd here for sure. And I think you're right. I don't think they drafted him to be for one, I don't think they thought Josh Jacobs was going to be as good as he was. But when they drafted him, I think they were really thinking he would be in the mix there as a staple in the offense. So I think he gets back to that at least as a dominant, pass game weapon, which we know Josh Jacobs just is not. So and then, with Shipley, I still don't hate this. I don't think A.J. Dillon's very good. And I think Shipley probably has a role in the offense to some extent, I think he's the second back on the field because he offers that change of pace, pass catching upside where A.J. Dillon just really doesn't. He's more of a battering ram. And then if Barkley went down, I think Shipley would get a really nice workload there. So I think Shipley's a premium handcuff for sure. But Lloyd, I think, actually has a chance to be like a significant player. In that Josh Jacobs contract, like they can escape it at any time. So if Marshawn Lloyd goes out and has a really good season, that's going to save them a lot of money. So
yeah, for me, it's Marshawn Lloyd because I think that when we look at historically, LaFleur offenses work in 2 running backs, where this was sort of always the complaint of Aaron Jones fantasy managers. Why am I conceding all these touches to a guy like A.J. Dillon? LaFleur sort of, time and time again. And then last year was sort of out of character for Green Bay, where they went so run heavy, got away from sort of the balance that we saw in 2023. And I think a lot of the reason was they didn't really trust their running back twos. They were bringing in guys like Chris Brooks alongside like Emmanuel Wilson. Yep. They said nice things about Wilson, but Lloyd was drafted to sort of be the changeup back. And I think that if Lloyd is healthy, I think you're going to see his redraft ADP climb throughout the summer because I think there'll be some very positive coach speak for him, beat reporters speak for him. It was there last year. They were enthusiastic about Lloyd. He just couldn't stay on the field. And we hate investing in these guys that we view as sort of brittle, that really can't stay on the field. That's sort of been a problem for guys like Kendre Miller. But I don't know if that's necessarily the case for Lloyd. Lloyd was a guy who had that dog in him. People really liked him at USC. Obviously was the Senior Bowl standout. Was a incredibly highly recruited running back when he went to South Carolina. I always love the story about Marshawn Lloyd, where Marshawn Lloyd went to DeMatha. And I'm from the DC area originally. DeMatha is sort of one of the best high school programs in the country, at least for many decades. Guys like Brian Westbrook played there. The Cuanjo brothers played there. There's been a ton of players coming out of DeMatha. When we talk about Marshawn Lloyd, he lived in Delaware and would travel from Delaware to PG County, Maryland, would have to take this incredibly long commute just to go play at this top-notch high school program. If anybody lives in that part of the country, imagine going from Wilmington to Washington, D.C. every single day and back in high school, having to do your homework on the road. This is the profile of a player that really worked for it. That story always sort of resonated with me. So I think Marshawn Lloyd really is that kind of a player. I think he could be a guy that could end up really affecting fantasy this year if we see a Josh Jacobs injury. And we're never trying to predict or root for injuries at any time. But when we talk about Jacobs had the second most touches of his career. That is an unsustainable workload for 2 straight years for Josh Jacobs in Green Bay. So Jacobs is 27 years old, and people say 27 sort of right in the wheelhouse. The last 3 RB1 overalls have all been 27 years old. But Jacobs came into the league really early, Brett. This is a guy who's handled a ton of volume throughout his career. So I think it's Lloyd for me. Shipley, you also have Jalen Hurts in that offense who's going to run for a ton. So I think if Saquon misses, it's all Jalen Hurts inside the red zone. Like, you're going to see way more Jalen Hurts rush attempts than if Saquon was on the field. So it's definitely Marshawn Lloyd. The last player I want to ask you about has sort of become a player that I'm pounding the table for in best ball, but I wonder if dynasty managers should also be adding him just as such a cheap cost bet. Last year, we saw Justice Hill have his best season as a pro, caught a ton of passes, but Keaton Mitchell is back. And people say that the explosiveness is there, just like we saw in his rookie year. His rookie year was awesome. He had played only 8 games, averaged 8.5 yards per carry. He also had nearly 100 receiving yards. So in 8 games played, he had about 500 total yards and had all these huge explosive plays. Sub 4.4 speed. Mitchell is just electric, and Baltimore seems to like him. We talked about if Saquon Barkley or if Josh Jacobs were to go down, the upside for a Lloyd or a Shipley. How about Keaton Mitchell? Now, obviously, Keaton Mitchell is not built like a Lloyd or a Shipley. Like, Lloyd and Shipley are very well built, like 220-pound players. Mitchell is tiny, like 180 pounds. But this is an offense that's so supportive for fantasy football production. I've got to think that if Derrick Henry went down, Keaton Mitchell would be a consideration in the flex for a lot of fantasy managers if he's able to overcome Justice Hill. Do you share my enthusiasm for Mitchell, or do you think this is one to just kind of ignore?
I don't have a take on this yet. I was going to wait and see how training camp kind of plays out. I do like Justice Hill in that role he's in. So I get that Mitchell's probably more explosive than Hill, although Hill's not a slouch himself. But he's such a good receiver. And so I think that's the only thing there. So if I find out that he is overtaking Justice Hill in that role, then yeah, I'd be all in, just because the added explosiveness makes him a really dangerous threat. So, but I think Justice Hill looked really good last year. So
7 runs over 20 yards for Keaton Mitchell that rookie year. I just can't get away from it, Brett, where he was just so productive, in that offense. So this is 47 rush attempts, and 7 of them result in runs over 20 yards.
Yeah, he definitely is probably a better change of pace running option than Justice Hill for sure.
Brett, this was awesome. We covered one more player. Let's add one more player. Is there a more exciting quarterback 2 for fantasy managers to roster right now than Jalen Milroe?
You're putting me on the spot. I have another player too, so don't kick us off after this.
Okay.
I'm going to put you on the spot. Jalen Milroe. Yes, this is so tough because, I didn't have like a ton of love for Milroe in the pre-draft process. I do think from a fantasy standpoint, though, it doesn't matter what I think. If he's on the field, you're starting him just because the rushing upside. But then you juxtapose that with my take on Sam Darnold, which is I think Sam Darnold stinks. So, yes, I probably want as many shares of Jalen Milroe as I can get. He's been expensive, though, in rookie drafts, at least, Theo. I don't know where he's, what the cost of acquisition now is in Dynasty, but gosh, I think he was going in that Scatabo range, like the early second round. So that's pretty expensive for a guy who's a 3rd round pick at. Go ahead.
I think that it's because people don't treat Sam Darnold like he's anything more than sort of a bridge here. And is Jalen Milroe the quarterback for Seattle in 2027? That's still a big bet to make. There's going to be multiple play. Like, my thing with Milroe is he's just so explosive as a runner, where we're trying to look at finding upside plays in Superflex. Like, I go down the list of guys: Marcus Mariota, Mac Jones, Jake Browning, Jimmy Garoppolo. There's all these backup quarterbacks: Sam Howell, Cooper Rush, Gardner Minshew, Joe Milton would be fun. But there's not that many where you're like, if the starter goes down, this is a player that is an immediate QB1 level talent. Jalen Milroe could be a QB1 based on his rushing ability. Like, all of the things that we like about like a Justin Fields, we've seen over the years with some of these uber productive running quarterbacks, where Jalen Milroe, he was unbelievably productive in the SEC. The rushing production, the rushing touchdowns, the miles per hour data, the 40-yard dash time, that Jalen Milroe, I think he's expensive for a reason. He's in your lineup anytime he plays. So Jalen Milroe absolutely should make any sort of sleeper. And even if he's expensive, it's still not that expensive. Like you're seeing him go where, Brett?
Well, in rookie drafts, I would like the 2-3, 2-4, something like that is
So
most of the draft in. Yeah,
yeah, that might be a little higher. But when we start getting down to like the end of the second round,
sure.
early third, I think it's worth the price of admission just in case he gets that opportunity. Now, who's the player you want to ask me about?
Yeah, so I love the Marshawn Lloyd anecdote. I got another player in the same draft class with a similar anecdote.
I can name it. I can name it. I can read your mind here. It's a player who used to fly to school every day, island to island.
Yes, it is. Name him.
Roman Wilson.
Roman Wilson. So the Pittsburgh Steelers are a team desperate to find a wide receiver too right now, right? And I know the beats are saying Calvin Austin looks good. I like Calvin Austin. I thought Austin put out some good tape last year, but they drafted Roman Wilson in the third round. He does a lot of things very well. Where you at on Roman Wilson, Theo?
Well, I loved Roman Wilson, but I think that we've seen all this Calvin Austin enthusiasm. You still have Jalen Warren in the mix where do the targets go to Roman Wilson in sort of the slot, or do the targets go to Jalen Warren out of the backfield in sort of a specialized receiver role? But I agree with you. Like Roman Wilson is exactly the sort of deep sleeper we want in Dynasty because he was the best receiver at the Senior Bowl, led Michigan in receptions on the national championship team, and was sort of a bona fide slot. And I was on a podcast with you pre-NFL draft where you compared Roman Wilson to Stephon Diggs, where not a lot of people were making that comparison, but you made a Stephon Diggs Roman Wilson comparison just in terms of your evaluative process. And that sort of always resonated with me. I think that Mike Tomlin talked about how Roman Wilson just couldn't stay healthy last year. And I think there was a complete lack of trust in a rookie that's missed that many reps getting on the field. That ship has sailed. So I think Wilson at the very least will be the wide receiver 3 there. And that gives him an opportunity to kind of overtake Austin. Like, I know you like Austin, but Austin is a big play threat, a deep threat, a speed guy. If it's like for like and they get the same amount of snaps, I'd probably bet on Wilson having more targets if they're on the field an equal amount of time. I just don't know if that's going to be the case this year.
Yeah, I kind of agree with you. I think Wilson does more things better, but Austin has that insane vertical juice. And Wilson's he's fast too, but he's not like Calvin Austin's like ridiculously explosive track speed guy. So
yeah. Roman Wilson, the story was, I believe it was, he flew from one island to Honolulu to play at like a Hawaii. I forgot the high school for him, but a Hawaii powerhouse high school. We love hearing these sort of stories, the perseverance that these players have to get to this level of college football, get to the level of NFL. It's always awesome to root for these sort of players. So absolutely rooting for Roman Wilson, rooting for Marshawn Lloyd, and rooting for Brett Whitefield as well to have an awesome offseason. Let me know once again what you have going on, Brett.
Yeah, First Read Podcast, NFL First Read on Spotify, Apple, wherever you get your podcasts. That's where most of my stuff is coming out right now. And then I do have an article series coming out soon here to kind of tie a bow on the offseason. But we're almost to the time of year, Theo, where I just put my head down and then no one sees me for 4 months. So, but we're not there yet. We still have some time.
100%. And this is a loaded week for us here at Fantasy Points, like it is every single week. Fantasy Points Podcast Network, Fantasy Points YouTube, School of Scott, Dynasty Life, Fantasy Football Daily. I'm going to be on Dynasty Points this week. I'm going to have your guy, Scott DiBenedetto, coming on School of Scott with me this week to go over the NFL's best offensive lines and how that can affect fantasy football. I got Dave Kluge coming on Fantasy Football Daily. We're everywhere here at Fantasy Points. Make sure you're checking out all of our amazing articles, all of our amazing tools over at Fantasy Points Data, and we're going to help you crush your fantasy football leagues this season.